Hello, my friends. Man, I've been reading about distortion and harmonics and realizing that I know nothing. So hopefully, hopefully Jon can come on here and educate me. Yeah, we got some interesting questions. So we'll see. We'll see what we have to answer here. Hey, the internet.
The internet.
How you doing, man?
Good.
Okay, I gotta ask you the question because you put it on your story too. Did you get the new car? It's nice.
It's so nice.
This is a Tesla. You're going to the future.
I'm going to the future. It's like, I haven't driven a car in 2 years.
I love that.
I've been driver's licenseless for 2 years. So,
that's right. You were at the DMV last week before our...
Yeah, exactly. So got the license, got the car. I drove it just straight home, though. They didn't really leave me with much of a charge. So I got to go charge it after this.
You're going to be like a teenager, just fucking, just leaving them in the dust.
I think I'm going to go for... sorry, I had to do not disturb my phone. There's people texting.
All good.
But yeah, I'm pretty stoked.
That's great.
I'm excited not to be landlocked downtown anymore. The idea of getting in an Uber right now during this pandemic is terrifying.
Yeah, I was just talking to another friend of mine about that. That seems like I don't know. Everything just seems a little sketchy, especially with California and the U.S. having a rough go with this thing here. But we're not here to talk about politics, are we?
No.
Or global pandemics. I guess we could, but I think on some level people like this because it's not that. So,
but honestly, on an overall happiness note, today is a good day. I know we all go through ups and downs during this time, and today felt a little bit like a Christmas morning, waking up to a delivery of my dream car that I've been trying to get for 6 years. So I'm definitely going to catch that wave and see how long it lasts and feel good for a minute. Yesterday was a really solid day of mixing. I think I did 4 songs yesterday, and all of them, people loved the outcomes pretty quickly. One was approved on a first pass. It's been a good couple of days, so I'll try to let that be infused into this discussion today.
Absolutely, man. Being appreciative, expressing gratitude, very, very important things. I was talking to another friend of mine about that yesterday, just trying to increase gratitude, especially when things are difficult, to make sure that you're taking stock of things. I spent a large portion of yesterday watching the two of us talk because I'm going to try to chop up, as we've talked about, chop up some of the clips and put these things on YouTube. Get a YouTube channel going so people can more easily watch these and watch little bits of them rather than just doing it on Instagram, IGTV. So that's coming soon. I know you just recorded a podcast last week for Conversations. How did that go?
Oh, so great. By the end of it, I think we recorded 3 hours. I'm not sure how, it'll probably be most of it. But at the end of it, we were like, damn, that actually went really well. I don't know if we had any expectations. We're going to do another one tomorrow night. We're going to go every Wednesday for a bit and see what we can kind of come up with. It felt great. It felt like we were continuing the conversation the 4 of us have anyway. We do this now organically, like kind of how we started. We're like, wait, we talk about this stuff. Why don't we record it and see if there's any positive feedback? So I'll let you know how the podcast went when people respond to it.
Well, I look forward to checking it out and look forward to participating as well. And it'll be great. So everybody definitely go if you're not already on the Conversations Instagram, go check that out. Conversations.at, right?
Yeah. For now, we're trying to get Conversations, but someone with 400 followers has it. So I think Michael's on
that. Well, so we talked last week about doing a specific chat for this hour on harmonics, harmonic distortion, and what happened was I spent a little time researching on the internet and realizing I know nothing about this stuff, or I should say it goes so deep. So whatever we talk about today, I definitely want to encourage people to just go Google a bunch of stuff, because that's certainly what I'm going to do. There's a lot of information out there. I'm going to go deep on the electrical engineering aspect of it, the acoustics aspect of it, the math aspect of it. There's lots of ways to go with this. One of the things that started looking into this morning was just about how the ear works, because I thought it would be an interesting place to talk about briefly. And I'm sure there are people that are biologists or ENTs, or not that a lot of them watch this, but if they do, they will be infuriated and be yelling at us in their brains. But the idea that the human ear actually has natural compression, equalization, and distortion mechanisms in order to protect it, really. I mean, that's why you
hair follicles.
Hair follicles, and there's all kinds, I mean, again, all kinds of stuff in there if you've studied the ear. But so this idea that the human ear is doing lots of EQ, compression, distortion, makes sense, and I've heard this from lots of people, and it makes intuitive sense that that's one of the reasons that distortion and compression and those sort of things sound good on recordings. It gives an illusion of basically that the human ear will compress and distort and EQ things as volume rises. There was a question about the Fletcher-Munson curve, the idea that the frequency response of your ear changes as volume goes up, and that's a natural biological part of the construction of your ear to protect it from loud volumes. So when we add distortion or come upon distortion in early audio gear or now in computers, it's something that it pleases our ears, and so the different types become very important.
Well, it can please your ears, and it also can deter us from feeling any possible enjoyment if you go too far.
Absolutely, there's a benefit to it, or there's a pleasing sound in certain aspects of it. Now, I'm not sure exactly how to structure this discussion. I know that in previous couple of streams, there's been a distinction in certain things, in certain aspects of record making between the writing, producing, and the mixing, finishing, in terms of how to think about what to use. And you've talked a lot about using harmonic distortion in very particular ways in the refining process, sort of as a result of getting things that have plenty of distortion and compression already in them, but you're doing particular things that not a lot of other people seem to be using, transient shapers and things like that. Yeah, I mean, take any of this stuff in any direction you want, but I'm curious.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways in. I don't think there's a difference between when using distortion in a production in a production state of mind or a mixed state of mind. You're going to use them both for the same ending outcome, right? There's going to be a usage for both types of distortion in both forms of work there. So the best way to do it is start with even versus odd order harmonics, right? And granted, I should step back to where you started this conversation from. You're going to have to Google stuff. I'm not an expert at this. I understand it fundamentally and maybe a little bit beyond. I don't necessarily think that there's much benefit to learning more about this, because then you're going to only think of the science behind it. And I never want to think fully with the science behind it. I want to think with my ears. I want to think with the Fletcher-Munson curve that we just discussed. The reason why I mix with a bit less high mids than maybe some other people is because our ears perceive that 3 to 5 or 2.5 to 5.5 kilohertz range 3 to 6 dB louder, depending on volume, based on that Fletcher-Munson curve. So we can afford, in my brain, at a certain loudness level, to reduce that overall by 3 to 5 dB. What I mean by that is you can literally take a EQ on a template on your mix bus and reduce that as kind of a handicap to keep your music more warm, if that's what you're going for. I don't necessarily do that, but I do have a spectral repair ozone plugin in that range on certain types of music that kind of give me a little handicap working into that. It's very subtle. Again, I don't really move any meters or needles on these things, but it's there to catch me just in case something peaks. So that, speaking of the ear, we like certain regions more than others, and also that affects loudness too, and that affects the algorithm of when things are turned down, like kind of that other discussion we got into, which I'm going to do my best to stay on topic for saturation harmonics for this purpose, since we've agreed to that. It's not really my skill, but even order harmonics. But thinking about pleasing harmonics, you're when you think about pure harmonics, you're thinking even order harmonics. You don't know that you're thinking it necessarily, but that's what they are. They hit fifths and octaves as you go up. And then odd order harmonics hit thirds and wind up creating a dominant seventh chord as it gets to the top. So
can I sidebar for just 1 second? If people don't know what the harmonic series is, they should Google it. It's basically this idea that any tone you're going to hear, with the exception of a sine wave, but any instrument, any vocal, anything that's one tone actually has a series of pitches above it that mathematically, octaves, fifths, fourths, and they get lower and lower in volume as it goes up. But the harmonic series is a very important part of acoustics.
The saturation and distortion plugins and tools and analog gear are reinforcing and elevating those harmonics depending on how far you go with them. They always exist. I don't know. I think a pure sine wave of the tone would be the only example of it purely being that one single tone.
Yeah, without overtones.
Without any overtones. The minute you almost put it through any piece of gear, any plugin, there's going to be overtones, whether you see it on Analyzer or not. It's there. And then as you dial in more different types of saturation, which we'll get into, that's how you bring up certain of those harmonics.
Yeah.
So even order harmonics, pleasing, pure.
Fifths and octaves, so the overtone series above the fundamental.
Are in
There's
key.
a type of distortion called even order will emphasize those harmonics.
Yes, those harmonics. So then you have odd order harmonics, which is more like a buzzy reed instrument, guitar amp overdrive that is hitting odd order harmonics and creating that kind of distortion, aggression that you're used to when you think distortion, when you think gain and that nasty like fuzz. That's all odd order harmonic. So those are the differences. That's a simple way to think about it. When you're trying to make something, which I would refer to as like a heightened naturalism, I've been liking to think of it, is more of an even order harmonic where you're adding more of what's already there, more of what feels good, round, pure, deep, rich. All of those characteristic words are even order harmonics. So in a mix aspect, when you don't want to distinctly change the producer or artist's sound, you're going to lean more heavily on that. You're going to embolden what's already there. You're going to bring up that rich, those rich overtones. No, not similar comparison to tube versus solid state. You can have solid state and tube of both. So that's kind of off.
Yeah, we'll get it. I read a bunch of things about that, and I got questions about that. But keep going.
Cool.
Sorry.
Yeah, we can get to that. I'll keep going. So if you add odd order harmonics, right away you're changing the sound. Whether you realize it or not, depending on how subtle it is, the sound is shifting. If we were at an analyzer, you'd see things kind of square off. Even order is going to give more of a rounded visibility to it, which is a form of compression. So when I talk about I don't compress, I strictly mean I don't take a compression tool with a ratio and a threshold and an attack and release functionality as we see in our brains and we think compressor. I don't use those, but I do saturate and distort, which is a form of compression. So we should make that distinction.
So a compressor is different from compressing.
Yes.
Anything that distorts, saturates, that sort of thing is going to, in its function.
It compresses the audio file. So
compress the dynamic
saturation, range. By definition, is simply changing the wave signal. That's all it is. It can be pleasing and it can be aggressive. It can be subtle. It can be strong. There are different tools, and you should use all the different tools to get the desired result. So when asking, I saw a question, when is it correct to use either? There's no answer to that. But I can talk specifically on if you want to not change the sound as much, use even order harmonics. So now, when I think about my mix bus and why I have so many tubes on the mix bus that are creating even order fundamental harmonics here, I'm doing that because it gives me an advantage to have this focused, fundamental, pleasing sound right there. Like it already does that job for me, so I can decide and shape my sounds into that emboldened, focused sound that I like, that's a bit up against the glass and a bit forward sounding and full. Then if I want to use odd order harmonics to create distortion and that feeling of tension, then I will do that as well. But I don't want that on every mix. I would argue that that even order harmonics will work on any sound source.
It's a more subtle, pleasing, because it's literally the waveforms are parallel. It's something that will thicken the sound without
in key.
Yeah, without changing it. So I was reading, and somebody asked, "Is this going to be saved?" This is all on my IGTV. I'm saving all these, but we're getting up YouTube and clips and all that kind of stuff as well. So just follow us, and we'll,
you could think of even order harmonics even more as filling in gaps, right? So when you're talking about MP3s and Spotify and how they stream, they're stripping frequency ranges out of their algorithm for their compression. So it can take up less space on the file on the streaming size, depending on where you are and where you're streaming, if you're on your phone, Wi-Fi, whatever. The tubes and all the types of saturation are filling in those gaps, which is why I hate MP3 on Spotify so much, because it's getting rid of all the love that I'm trying to add, but they're doing it with a proprietary algorithm that we have no idea, right? So that's another discussion, but you have to think of it that way, where when you think of a high-res wave file, all those gaps are filled in based on the intention of the producer and the mixer, right? That we're dialing in all these harmonics, all these different types of harmonics. We have to use our ears, right? Sometimes you want those odd-order harmonics so we can cut through the mix in a certain way. Maybe you want to, like with FabFilter, Saturn and Saturn 2, which I'd argue never use Saturn 1. 2 is sounding really great right now. You can pan where the distortion comes, right? So you could have a stereo hard left pan guitar track or two mono, whatever, and pan that saturation left and right. So the middle is clean and clear, and you can put your bass there, your vocal, all that, and get that guitar and that saturation only on the sides. Like, there's so many tricks now that you can do with saturation. It just seems like a more exciting tool to get desired results than plopping on a compressor.
Using saturation over a compressor, especially in mixing, does seem like there's just so many more things, so many more ways to play with it, and you're not going to lose transients, which I know is your favorite thing in the world.
And again, like I said, you are rounding or squaring off things, and I think the reason I love my DW Fern tube gear is that it doesn't really round out transients. At least to my ear, it's just perceived. There's added punch in a lot of areas. Granted, I use transient shapers like we discussed before and after this, but in the box, in plugins, I don't think that's been nailed yet. I don't think the actual tube has been emulated in any plugin yet. I want that to change. I've talked to Doug Fern about this, because even his Ruby plugin that Acoustica, I think they're called, makes, it doesn't sound anything like my VT5. It just doesn't sound anything like it. The top end it's a very good EQ plugin. Overall, it is great, but one of the best plugins I've ever used, honestly, for EQ, but it sounds nothing like the gear. I don't think tubes have been completely modeled yet.
Well, so one of the questions as I was reading on the old internet, so there was lots of not differing opinions, but it seems that the conventional wisdom that tubes are even order harmonics, and tape and other things more odd order harmonics, it's not that cut and dried.
No.
It really is about the circuitry, but the stuff that you're using, the Fern stuff, and a lot of the gear that we think of as great old tube gear is much more weighted toward even order harmonics.
Yes, again, we should actually double down on that.
Please.
It's weighted towards. I don't think there is any piece of gear out there. There's definitely not a plugin out there that is exclusively even or odd order harmonic.
I think there's some that emulate it, but I don't know how good they are.
Okay. I'd like to know what those are.
Like a Distressor has a second and third order harmonic distortion button on it.
But you can add it.
Right.
It still has other harmonic distortion. There's no box that is single-handedly doing
it's just one kind.
To my knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the whole point of the Distressor. You can add that, but it's already doing some saturation that we don't know what it's doing exactly, right? The only way you can see this is by having an analyzer and then turning up the input gain on a saturator, like say you stay with FabFilter.
That's a really good exercise. Everybody should do that if they're curious about it. Put a sine wave or something into and like FabFilter, one of these things, and then
use Saturn and then have a Pro Q3 analyzer right after it, and then turn it up, and you can see what it does. You'll see, like, if you use a sine wave, it's all round at the bottom, nothing above 80 hertz or whatever it is. You'll start seeing it open up little by little. and like things.
And you'll see it at octaves too. If you do it at 100, you'll see it at 200 and then 400.
400, 600. Yeah, those will be the
octaves
even
and
order.
fifths and all that.
Yeah. So I don't think there's a box that does only. But yes, we weight them. So I tend to lean on, especially in the mixing, on even order harmonic tools. So from my best knowledge, the exciter in warm mode from Neutron, from Ozone, is, and I've looked this up as well, it's predominantly even order harmonic emulation. You can hear it too. As soon as you go to the retro or you go to the tube or tape, like you'll start hearing that kind of reedy buzz coming into it. But if it's only in warm, the sound just gets a bit fatter, thicker.
Well, this is what you talk about with density, when you talk about
Yes.
what you're trying to achieve in a mix. And that's I think it's a really beautiful sort of sound design concept that when you are using harmonic distortion, especially even order, what you're getting is a thickening of the sound, because if a single tone, and of course there's lots and lots of tones happening at any given time in a song, but even with a single tone, you're getting a richer version of that tone by emphasizing the overtones in it. So when you're doing that on a mix, you're actually getting a thicker, denser sound without actually turning up the volume necessarily, although it does add some volume.
It can. I think you've got an AB and you have mix, dry, wet knobs on almost every plugin at this point. But I'm thinking about it now as a sinking ship. I'm thinking about a rough mix that someone's like, damn, I really need to get this mixed, as a ship with a bunch of holes in it. And is it going to make it across the lake or not? Is it going to make it, and as you add this fundamental saturation, these harmonics grow, the ship becomes more stable, and then it's an enjoyable ride throughout the entire length of the song or the lake. And that's how I think about harmonics and saturation versus compression tool. Again, it's thinking about it as a different tool to accomplish a very specific goal, and I want the listener to be transported across that song from start to finish. And then we're talking about ear and Fletcher-Munson curve and the way that our ears hear things. That's connected to our entire nervous system, right? So we hear something that creates a feeling inside of us. And humans really like fundamentals. They really like those second and third order harmonics. They like the chord that's being built subconsciously. Our job is to determine how much of each of them are going to be
because you get
there.
the fundamental plus the emphasis of the octaves above it, and that relationship makes it feel more solid.
Yeah, I mean, if an 808 only existed in the fundamental, you would never hear it on small devices, so we wouldn't get that apparent, loudness coming from.
What's a great example of that is the Cardi song "I Like It." The 808 has so many overtones on it. You hear it on an iPhone and you hear the 808, and it just feels
an 808 should be able to be implied on every sound device that we listen to music on. Other than that, I mean, that's the hull of the boat. How the fuck? What am I doing with these boat?
I don't know. You're very nautical today, and I appreciate it.
So nautical. That's if we don't have the bass in a sound on a device. How do you? Sometimes you can't even hear the chord changes. I mean, what if the sample in a trap record is the same two chords over and over again, but the bass emphasizes a 4-chord pattern, right? That's how we hear musicality over the lyric, and that's how we get an emotional connection to a song. So saturation is how we connect emotionally towards records, whether we know it or not, whether we're doing it additively or not. It's there inherently.
So utilizing second order harmonic distortion, which tends to lean toward, or tubes tend to lead toward that, although not exclusively, the idea of building density of a track, and which also is clarity on a lot of levels, is really important. I've definitely made a number of great beats, and then I play it on a system without a huge amount of bass, and there's just no chords. Do you run into things like that where you're actually trying to basically add chordal density as well?
Always. Yeah.
A lot of that.
A lot of the time, that's my job. A lot of times I get a note that's specifically, hey, we love this, but I can't hear the 808 on a phone or on AirPods. It could be, I get that specific note a lot. Hey, I'm sure you have better tricks than I do. That's what I'm looking for from you, because my speakers can't produce that. So I'm guessing here, right? That's part of my job. And I think that's why when we talk about earlier on in our conversations, we talked about where I start on a mix. People ask me all the time. It's always different. But if it's an 808 record, it's a trap record, it's a hip hop record with an 808 that's strong, I'm mixing drums, 808, and vocal together to make sure that the vocal and the 808 and that bass pattern is heard. Right, that's like kind of the first go-to in a track like that. For that reason, I want to hear chord value against melody.
I feel like a lot of the great mixers, I haven't asked this question to a lot of them, but I hear a lot about vocals and drums, low end and drums, vocals and drums, because that's ultimately, those are your transients, that's the focus, that's the way to structure it. So you're using harmonic distortion all over the place as a tool to replace traditional compression in a lot of ways. Are there other places you use it besides transients, vocals, low end?
Yeah, I mean, I use it on everything, but everything. I wouldn't say that
sort of mixing into it, I guess. I
wouldn't say I'm using it to replace the compressor. I'm using it to get a desired outcome that I know that it's the best tool for that we have. I don't think about using a compressor and then say, no, I'll use the saturator instead, right? That doesn't come into my mind.
Right.
So I don't want to say I replace a compressor with it. I think it's a
the things that you're solving problems that other people would reach for a compressor for, but you feel could be solved with saturation and transient stuff.
Sure.
A little bit more.
Sure. Yes. You can say that. I don't, what about using effect compressor for a bit of harmonic color? Sure. But I would argue, why do you need the compressor to find that FET color? Find a saturator that you like that doesn't take off your transient as much and as strongly to add that color. I think that's a great reason to use a FET compressor, but why use a compressor when you can only use the saturation tool that's built into that compressor that now we have separate from the compressor?
And one thing I want to step back on is that, we're talking not exclusively, but with the paradigm of mixing more than anything else. There's some questions about like what harmonic distortion do I use on the vocals? What are your thoughts on pentode, triode, different types of
all of them?
With all this
areas.
Stuff. I mean, I think a lot of it's just tools. I mean, you look at something like when Kanye did 808s and Heartbreak, he's running a SansAmp plugin for that distortion effect, and that's fucking awesome and crazy sounding. So we're not talking about evil third order harmonics or not using certain things. We're talking about mostly very specific sort of finishing mixing things.
Yeah,
but in terms of distortion,
we didn't get there yet.
Yeah,
we didn't get there yet. If I'm hired to take something a bit further, and someone's asking me for a specific reference point that is 9 Inch Nails or something a bit more distorted, or like Kanye, it's a great example, then you have to use odd order harmonics to get that gnarliness, right? So totally. I don't even want to I don't really want to go down like an hour conversation. I have to specify what we're using it for. We're using both of them at all times for different reasons. Well, so if I'm talking to you and I'm thinking I'm only talking about even order harmonics, that defeats the purpose. I want to be talking about distortion, and then we'll give examples on what all of them are and when to use them. But your original question was, like, do you only use it on drums, bass, vocal kind of thing? Like, I use it on every sound. I think about chords a lot. I think about chord value and melody at equal members of the band to the drums, bass, and the vocal. And I know a lot of mixers don't tout that on their Instagrams or in their mix with the masters. It's drums, vocal, man, 808. Like, yeah, that's tight. We need that. But also chords and harmonics and that fundamental musical value is what evokes an emotion in a song. Sure, drums can too, and how hard they hit, sure. But I think it's all equal. So I think about harmonics, and the tubes that I have in my mix bus are a bit of a cheat code towards getting the fundamentals and the chordal elements that come up. So if you're mixing in the box, there's a inherent low-mid buildup in a lot of things that you think you need to cut out.
Why is that?
I don't know. Pro Tools just does it between 250 and 400 or 500. It's kind of just this cloudiness that is in the box sound. I could hear it in all DAWs. When I get an Ableton Rough, I hear that a little higher. It's like 500 to 700 to 900. It's just like this kind of boxiness that sounds like this. And you can scoop that out and it makes it sound clear, but it also loses a lot of vibe, right? So the minute you take that out, someone's like, oh, it sounds different. And they might hear the improvement and the depth and the clarity, but they also might say demoitis and it sounds different. I don't like it anymore. So that's why a lot of people that mix purely in the box have saturation plugins on their mix bus. So it kind of...
Somebody asked a question about that. You're basically... You have a version of that, except it's not a plugin. It's actually some sick...
No, I have plugins that I also use, but not on the mix bus. The mix bus is all analog.
But you do have some things that are adding even order harmonic distortion, even if subtly, as on the mix bus.
On every song in the last 4 years or so. And
so
before those 4 years, I had a plugin doing it to emulate that in the box.
Do you think that's the case for almost all of these A-level mixers like yourself, that there's some sort of mix bus saturation option?
Maybe in different kinds. I don't know what Serban is doing. He's the mystery in the room. He says he's in the box. Does he have any summing? Does he have any analog mix bus? I mean, I don't know. I have an analog mix bus, but I sum in the box, right? So if someone says, do you mix in the box? My answer is it's hybrid, but I do all my summing in the box and all with plugins, but my mix bus has like 20 plus tubes on them, on it. So there's a lot of analog love on the chain. So I think about that for chords. I don't think about that for drums. I think about that for fundamental activity that enriches music and helps it stand the test of time, right? That's why I think I have those boxes, why I've spent the money and invested in them, because they're not cheap. That's why a plugin can't emulate them yet, if ever. They're handcrafted for this purpose with love of the designer that loves music and fundamentals in sound. So it's when you look deeper into who's making this gear, that's where you find out that it's designed for that reason, for that purity, that transparency. Now, when I say transparency, and I don't mean everything has to be sterilely cleaned. That's not the thing. It showcases what is already there, right? So it showcases the intention. And if something is gnarly and distorted, it's going to bring that to the foreground. It's going to bring that to the focal point. It's not going to clean up a distorted sound, but it will reinforce the even order harmonics to give that chord value balanced out with the odd order and that crunchy distortion sound. Now, there's a way that I've been looking at it for the past probably decade. I think about Bill Evans playing piano. He's my favorite musician, and
pretty good.
He's can talk. That's another conversation.
We'll do jazz another.
When he's playing, his left and right hand are perfectly matched at all times. He plays clusters. The weight of the left is still equal to the delicacy of how he plays the right. You can hear it in every chord that he plays. There's balance, right? And I think about a lot of music is like this on the left and like really separate and bright on the right. And I'm just trying to do this and have the hands match so they play at all times. And I think even order harmonics and gear that has that inherently in it does that for me. It levels the playing field for all the frequencies. And then because I have that, I can choose where to reduce and where it shines. So that's kind of an overall thought.
Oh, we got a McCoy Tyner rebuttal. He's pretty good too.
Yeah.
I remember seeing him when I was like 10 years old in Oakland. So it seems almost counterintuitive in the way a lot of people talk about clarity, because you think of clarity as let's take off distortion, let's take off density, but it turns out the right kind of harmonic distortion will actually solidify sounds and make them more clear. I guess on some level that's what you're talking about with transients, where you're basically, when you're saturating a transient in the right way, you're actually reducing it on some level and compressing it on some level, but you're thickening it up, and therefore it's more clear.
It's balancing.
But balancing it, yeah.
It's lifting up certain frequencies, dropping others so they stay balanced, and you're kind of dialing in that knob, whatever you're using, or that slider, whatever you're using, and your ears are now hearing things a bit more evenly. I think that's what I'm going for at all times. And then in addition, you can start to overcolor things when you want to. But getting that full spectrum, bandwidth, frequency-wise on as many sounds as you can is going to translate more to more systems. So that's kind of my overall feeling on why I use a lot of harmonic distortion and saturation.
Josh asked you about is the glue that a lot of people talk about from compression. I think that's one of the functions of it. Absolutely,
one of the functions. I mean, you can dial in glue. Thinking sonically, I guess, because compression can dial in glue feel wise too.
One of the things that we talked about. I know you're loath to talk about specific gear and things, but those people that cannot afford great Fern gear, you've mentioned the isotope stuff. Neutron and ozone both have transient and harmonic functions that are really great. I'd not heard you talk about Saturn before. You said you like Saturn.
I got over Saturn 1 a year into it coming out, and I overused it, and I had heard too much phasing to do with between each band, and the mix, the wet dry knob. I swear things are phasing out when it wasn't 100%. So I kind of stopped using it. I don't use any tools that when I put it on, I'm not sure if it's improving or not, the signal. So Saturn 2 has fixed most of their issues. It actually sounds really good. So I'm using it right now. That's why I'm talking about it. It's one of the newer tools that's been released by one of my favorite plugin companies. So I'm going to use it. I'm not overusing it, but I'm using it a lot recently. I definitely think that the Neutron Exciter in warm mode will get you close to what I'm discussing in this versus buying a cheaper piece of gear. We talked about this last week, I think, or the week before. I would say don't buy tube gear or any gear unless it's the highest end you possibly can get. Save your money, use the plugin, and then buy the gear.
The money is much, much better spent on plugins, and you can do so much with it with various plugins.
And you can't take off what you're doing with the gear. You can minimize and reduce and use a more minimally effective dose of the plugin and really kind of sculpt that. If you don't want to,
you can use 15 shitty of them too.
Yeah, exactly. But let's jump back for a second to distortion, and also let's bring jumping a little bit into gear. Let's talk about distortion and monitoring, right? Okay. So if you don't have good monitors, let's not even think about buying a tube compressor or a tube EQ for your mix bus. The first thing is a monitoring setup that lets you hear distortion, lets you hear your distortion, and it has no adding distortion to the sound, because speakers and converters should never dictate anything that has to do with distortion, right? It should be as clean. That's a clean and transparent view into the song, into the record-making process. If your speakers are distorting, they tell you that your sound is more distorted than it actually is, and then it's not going to translate other places, right? So when thinking about spending money, I think first and only about monitoring. You can do everything in Pro Tools, Ableton, Logic, Studio One, Reaper, all these DAWs. You can make a professional sounding record in all of them with practice. I don't think anybody needs to buy any tubes to get started. I think that's going to solve their problems and their holes in their mix. I think you can understand the desired outcome and sound that you're driving towards with a plugin. Then when you hear the gear do it, then you'll know the difference that I'm kind of discussing here. I don't necessarily know that if it's like you have to eat the hanger steak and the skirt steak before you understand how good a ribeye is. You have to understand the shittier cuts of the animal to understand how good something can be. If you just hear a GW Fern, you might not actually have that profound moment that I had when I took the Saturn off the mix bus 5 years ago and had the Fern on it, right? But having the PMC speakers and having this transparent playback system in real time, that's how I heard that the Saturn 1 was phasing out on things, right? I thought on my Focals, when I had them in my Genelex time before I had the Focals, that thing sounded great because it was kind of giving me this fake focus. And then the minute that I got PMCs on the same mixes that I had the Saturn on the mix bus, I bypassed it. I was like, whoa, all of a sudden everything jumped out. Like I was holding everything back. Like you thought about glue, it was almost too much glue. It was just getting in the way, and everything was back. And then the minute I took it off, things unglued, and there were problems in the mix, clearly, but everything became more active. And I was like, oh, that's what Tony Maserati's mixes sound like. That's what Manny Marroquin's mixes sound like. That's what Jimmy Douglas's mixes sound like. They sound a bit more professional than mine because there's the right amount of glue and the right amount of activity. And saturation can dial in that balance, and so can compressors. I'm not saying never use a compressor, but the monitoring is really what lets you know what things are doing. So if we're talking about gear recommendations, monitoring is first. So everybody,
it's something that you've talked about before, and maybe there's even a larger discussion about learning about gain and gain staging and things like that.
Yeah, that's a different
thing. To understand that every part of the process of engineering has potential bottlenecks and has to have things that match, so you're not trying to put too little signal and then you're turning something up too much, or you have too much signal and there's subtle distortion, and those things can add up as well.
That's a huge part. That's, again, probably another hour conversation. Like what I'm specifically thinking of, the relevance in our conversation about harmonic distortion is a good set of speakers will let you determine if you like even or odd order harmonics better, right? Or more, sorry, not better. You'll decide, oh, this is doing the 808 is such a clean signal. I need a bit of that odd order triode setting on an exciter or the Culture Vulture to bring those more gnarly distortion peaks through, because the guitar is super warm and thick and gooey, and we're going to leave it like that, but we need that to poke through. Yeah. Maybe the upper mid-range of the vocal needs to be softened, so you'll use even order harmonic in the upper mid-range, but you'll use an odd order in the low mids to get it to cut through on top of the keyboards that are also really pure. Like now we have all these tools that we can do multi-band versions, but the best thing about the monitoring is it allows you to hear the crossover point and know if you're phasing something out and doing harm. And if you have a super heavy sort of saturation plug-in on your mix bus and bad monitoring, you think things are sounding full, and you're actually making things sound really tiny. A lot of my mix job is relieving people's mix buses of their hard work. You know, there's doing so much boxing things in as soon as I let it expand, and then I have to fix glue issues like Josh was bringing up over there. Like that can be the glue, but I'm going to find a bit more of an improved glue technique without slamming it all in one plugin and relying on one plugin to handle this.
I would just like to acknowledge the people in the chat for pointing out something that I always notice and love about you, which is everything ultimately becomes a food and cooking analogy.
I used boat earlier. I was on a nautical.
Used boat. I know. I was surprised. I was like, we're getting very nautical, and all of a sudden you're back to food, which is very important.
Yeah, but it's the only way I know how to speak.
Yeah.
I love cooking. I love eating. I love serving other people food. I love serving other people their songs. There's a lot of good analogies to it. A delicious, stew in a pink Le Creuset or something. Like, I'm trying to serve that shit up right nice in the best way possible.
I like that it's pink. Mine's light blue.
Ooh, I love that one. Classic.
Well, that's cool. I mean, there's a lot of different directions we can go on this stuff. It's funny I think what happens when you talk to, or you have two people like us who've had a lot of experience doing this, you start on one topic and you go, okay, let's talk about harmonic distortion. And then we go a few steps back and say, make sure your monitoring is really good, because if you don't know what you're hearing, the subtleties of different types of second order and third order harmonics in combination, it's just not going to matter if you can't.
It means nothing if you can't hear it, if you can't feel it.
Yeah.
And I thank you for re-bringing that point up. I'm going on rants, but that is the most important thing that we can discuss today.
Monitoring.
We're going to talk about that in 3 to 5 minute clips in every episode by default, because everything that we discuss comes back to, can you even hear the difference?
Use your ears, and if the only way to use your ears is to be able to hear things with the right speakers.
Yes.
Yeah.
But harmonic distortion, you started with it. That's how we hear music. That's how our ears determine how much of each chord, each sound, each everything we're hearing. So, of course, that's going to be a fundamental tool that we should be using, more so than compression, because we're not compressing to level. I mean, you can be, but I think that's lazy. Yeah. Level your sounds, write a good arrangement. If something's wrong with the source material, fix it first before you just slap a compressor on. I think an argument to that, and I'll get some slack from Spider probably, but I think that if you want to record with a compressor plugin on to get vibe directly in headphones, like I think and you don't have time, you're in that moment, you're not trying to like dial in mic technique in a writing room because you only have 4 hours to get a song down. Sure, use that, but don't use a hardware compressor where that's it. It's done. You can't take it off. Like we have latency issues, sure, but find your best recording platform that allows you to to record with zero or to little to no ratio. I'm going too fast. Latency. And I think that's really important to know that, yes, these tools serve a purpose, but they're not one size fits all. Compressing to level is lazy. I mean, that's exactly, I think I would argue that. I think if
you talk about using clip gain and things like that. I mean, when you're
Logic had clip gain 4 versions before Pro Tools had clip gain. Like clip gain's been a thing. Like, why are you going to compress dialogue for a podcast? You know what I mean? You're going to raise the segments that you want louder. I don't want to hear my fucking in a podcast. I don't like. What do you need that for? That's not. So we know that these applications of these tools don't have to be used on audio religiously. Right.
Well, just FYI for the people that are going to ultimately listen to this in audio form, it has the built-in iPhone compression. There's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, fair. I'll have a little more flexibility on the.
Yeah, we'll do this. We'll do this with the SM7s at some point soon.
At some point, we're gonna have to. It just sounds way too good, man. It's like it actually kind of blew my mind when we did like quick playback the other night. It's like, oh wow. The sounds as good as it can get. It's crazy.
So are my SM7s, do they sound better than the other SM7s?
Than the brand new. Yeah, they do. They do.
Mine are seasoned. I think I lent you 2, right?
I think, Spider and me are using those right now. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So I think we covered a lot on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll see if there's any.
Is there any questions for the next 10 minutes? That we can
somebody asked something about hard clipping versus, I think they said traditional distortion, but what
does that mean?
I don't. Yeah, hard clipping and soft clipping. Just how much intensity you want to put in there.
I don't want to.
What you want it to sound like. Hard clipping is basically just chopping the waveform, and that sounds aggressive as fuck, and can be cool for the Kanye type vocals or things like or something else. Anywhere in between harmonics. Do you have any just sort of maybe a 2-minute response or maybe longer or shorter? When do you go, okay, this needs harmonic saturation versus EQ? Like you hear a vocal and you're like, I need some clarity, I need some brightness, I need something. When do you go, okay, I'm going to just actually turn up some high end versus...
Yeah, the simple answer is when I'm thinking additively that something needs something, I think saturation. When I think subtractively, I need to get rid of something, I think EQ.
So are you doing much boosting of EQ? Interesting.
No, very little. And if so, in small amounts, I tend to saturate in frequency energy for addition.
Meaning frequency ranges that you're hearing energy?
Yeah, if I want, to be more specific, if I want more high mids in a vocal, I'll use a saturating tool to inject that in versus just boost 2K.
Okay. And do most of the saturation...
A bit more broad and colorful.
Most of the saturation tools will have an apparent loudness. Do you then compensate for that, or is that part of the effect? You use your ears is what you're saying. Okay. For those listening... I don't lower the...
I don't lower gain after I saturate. I dial in the saturation, whether... let's use the ozone exciter as an example for this. I use that very often. And if I'm going in that high mid area on a vocal that I'm talking about, I will turn the mix and the amount all the way up and see what it's doing. What character am I getting? And I'll cycle through the different types. Dual triode, warm, tape. retro, whatever they are, and I'll go through all of them. If I land on one I like right away and I just, that's what I was going for, sure, but that comes with practice and knowing. But I'll cycle through all of them, and then I'll take the amount down to like it's not too gnarly and it's just giving enough of the character, but it's not sizzling all the time. And then I fuck with the mix knob, and you kind of just get that balance in. That usually helps the gain because I'm dialing in, I'm shaping the sound. I'm not thinking of volume in that way. You're not getting much volume. You're getting apparent loudness, sure, but that's what I'm trying to get out of that, is back to that density word. I'm trying to get that density right up, and that's how I use the mix for that, the mix knob.
That's an interesting thing. I froze. Can you hear now? Can you see me? I can see you fine.
You froze. Now you're back.
All right. I was just gonna. The thought that I had is a very good technique for EQing and compressing and everything is put a whole lot on there to start, so you know exactly what you're hearing. So you put some harmonic distortion on and overdo it, cycle through the different types, and then bring it back down. So you really have a good clarity of like, oh, this is what it's adding, and then you go in and balance it from there.
Exactly. And that makes it unmistakable for your ear to determine what you're adding or what you're subtracting. You become acclimated and conditioned to what you're listening to. That is a key trick for every application of any tool that we're using. Overcook it.
I do that with tempo changes too. Like if a song is at 135 and I'm like, it probably feels like it should be 138. I bring it to 150, 145, get used to it sounding crazy, then bring it back and go, this feels comfortable. Like taking things too far so that you know exactly what it feels like, or you know the extreme version of it is a really important part.
So, I mean, again, use your ears, and same with use your body and feeling for that tempo change. Trust your gut on where it lands, but you're going to kind of come back to it as you're working through the song. So maybe by the time you get to that third chorus, that's where that amount of saturation on the vocal was nailing it. And then you might have to automate that down in other parts. I go back I was working on, this happened the other day. I was working on a vocal in the second chorus and I was looping the chorus, but then how I dialed in the overdrive on dude's vocal, it was too forward for the verse, and then I just automated less Saturn, or less drive, or however. I might even just turn the volume down. I forget, but it was just too forward because it's not going to work for everything, right? So you always have to check all your parts of the arrangement with a lot of these moves. I think I said last week, like you're making reductions, and by the time that you get to the last chorus, that too much sub addition in a bass in the first verse or second verse might not work in the last chorus because there's another layer of synth that comes in that has low end. So now you have to decide, am I going to filter out the added low end because now you have a dialed in low end that the producer didn't have? Or do you want to switch the positions, and was their low end feeling better in that section, but it's too competitive now, you're clipping your mix, but whatever it is, it's not, a lot of moves are not one size fits all for entire arrangements. So you have to constantly make these moves, like you're constantly changing a tempo and thinking about that, or even changing the key of a song. You're going up a half step, you're just going to stop there. You're going to try the whole step up. You're going to keep trying this. You're going to work your way back. Always thinking about work your way back. So that's a really good point.
We got just a few minutes left. I think we covered a lot of good stuff. Definitely want people to make sure they check out the Conversations Instagram, because you guys are going to be putting stuff out. We're getting this thing going. Been working on chopping up clips, getting them on YouTube, getting an audio version of this.
So excited.
And if people have other ideas, other questions, the idea for this is to be a conversation that people can participate in, ask questions. There's been a lot of good questions in the chat and got questions leading up to it. So thank you guys for tuning in. And we're just here to have these conversations. We had these conversations in private, and now we're just trying to have them because people seem to find them useful. Go ahead, please.
There's someone asked a question: do I use EQ and saturation in conjunction? Yes, that's a bit of an old school technique where you're boosting a frequency into a saturator to saturate that specifically. Yes, I will do that, and I think about that on certain things. But now having multi-band saturators, you're kind of that's what you're doing. So not necessarily a necessity to do that anymore. But that's a really good question, because yes, that's how you would shape that upper mid-range saturation vibe. You would boost that into that saturate and then do some reductive EQ. Maybe you're bringing up too much harshness because of that. We have a little more flexibility now with tools, and that excites me. And that's a really good distinction to make. That's the move that they're implying there.
It seems like the multiband saturation is also basically replacing multiband compression.
So I haven't used multiband compression in a long time.
Mostly just because it phases everything funny?
Yeah, it's sort of punch. Some people say the only way you can get a certain sound is with a multiband compressor, and I say, well, then I don't want that sound. That's not my sound. I don't want that.
Alexander Clifford asking about monitoring. I think we should do a whole thing on.
Let's do that next week
at some point. Maybe we should talk about just food next week, or food analogies.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's probably good for the time being. I can't wait to see you soon for some food. Now that you have a vehicle, I'm very excited about this.
Can't wait. Can't
All
wait.
right. Thank you guys for multi-band on the master. Just go crazy.
Let's go.
Thank you guys so much.
We have 4 minutes, so I'll just take 1 more minute and say,
okay.
MattRad, I love doing this with you. It's so fun, and the people that are on this listening to us, I hope the fun translates. And I love the idea of the conversation continuing with you guys, giving us questions and comments.
Please, yeah.
I'm not, I get really distracted easily. So I'm looking at your questions and then I forget what I'm going on. So I'm going to go on tangents and hopefully hit a couple of gems here and there and slowly look at what you're saying and chime in. Matt's way better at that. And I really appreciate him doing that and kind of including everybody. I don't mean to exclude. I really want to include everyone. That's the whole point of my conversations tonight that started with engineers upstairs here that I can't do because of the pandemic. It's to include everybody. I don't know it all at all. I only know enough, and I'm really certain about my uncertainty. It's something I really pride myself on at this point. I want to learn. Please fill us in on things that you know that you feel certain on, and I'm either going to debunk it or I'm going to go with it. Like, let's just push things a little further than a bit more simplistic views on things. Let's ask harder questions. And
that sounds great, man. Yeah, this is a blast to do with you. And people are asking, where can you find this stuff? It's on my IGTV for now. We're getting YouTube up. Jon is doing a lot of great stuff with his Conversations crew. They're going to have stuff coming out. I'm going to talk to some other people as well for sort of Live with MattRad thing. Appreciate you guys very much. Appreciate you, Jon. Love you. Can't wait to see you again soon.
Love you too.
Bye, guys.
Peace.